A warm welcome to all of our ISM members and guests joining us today. And we would like to also do a shout out to the Virginia Carolinas and ISM South Florida for joining our webinar series as well. So welcome. Please be sure to ask any questions by using the chat or the Q&A function. Our speaker for today is Jane Tierney, who will be speaking on find dollars leaking through the supply chain, draining the bottom line. Jane has been a previous speaker for us, and we would like to welcome her back. She founded her company Purple Link in 2015, recognizing there's a better way to obtain value and achieve results from and through supply chains. Clients discover innovative ways to identify waste and risk that leak dollars from the supply chain and drain the bottom line. Through collaboration and stakeholders and suppliers, Purple Link's approach reduces both cost and risk, and clients sustain savings and improvements year over year. Jane has earned both an industrial engineer and MBA degrees. She is passionate about Lean and Six Sigma and is a certified green belt. Jane also has her CPSM and CPSD certifications. At this point, I'd like to turn the stage over to Jane.
Thanks so much, Kathy, and thank you all of you for attending today's event. This is an important topic to everyone. Everyone's always looking for cost reductions in the supply chain world, and I'm happy to be able to speak virtually to so many of you. People pre-pandemic used to say, what is a supply chain? When I told them that I worked in supply chain or had a company that worked on supply chains, they said, what is that? And what does that mean? Now they all think they know because we went through shortages in toilet paper and various other things. But I think really that many of them picture the supply chain as kind of this knotted chain as depicted in this picture, that they don't really know what it is, but they think they have an idea and it's probably all messed up. And if you listen to too much on the news or read on the internet today, you'll see that a lot of people think that there are a lot of challenges in the supply chain. And those of us in this profession know that that's true, but we also know that we're resilient and that we can solve these problems. So let me tell you a little bit about me above what Kathy told you. I am excited to share some of the tricks that I've discovered, some knowledge and expertise that I've collected that has saved companies money and improved their bottom lines. My background, as Kathy said, is in industrial engineering. And I am a bit of a factory geek. I really like factory tours. And if you don't believe me, you can ask my husband that's been dragged through various and sundry ones over the years. So quite a few years ago, after I launched my career as a manufacturing engineer and I worked my way into management, I learned that my engineering degree and experience gave me a lot and gave me a great foundation. But then I was a manager and I knew that I needed to learn more about business. So back to school, my MBA, my company did some things and they closed the plant. So lots of people looking for jobs. The best company I connected with was Hewlett Packard, but the job they offered me was as a project manager in procurement. And I didn't really know anything about procurement. It was working with suppliers and various types of manufacturing. And we were building inkjet printers, which was kind of fun at the time. So it was a good thing for me to learn about product launches and project management, that they needed those skills and I knew I was good at that. And then I got the chance to travel domestically and internationally to interact with suppliers, which really intrigued me. And I loved that job. It took me a year though to admit that I worked in procurement and didn't really use the term supply chain at the time, but I loved working with suppliers, being in and around all those factories, and knew that I'd really found my calling. So I worked for HP and other large US corporations, and I really learned a lot. But I also learned that there were still some gaps that I saw in companies. So in 2015, I left the corporate world to start and run Purple Link. I also teach classes in the California state system to juniors and seniors studying business. I teach about operations and supply chain. In all honesty, I wasn't that great a student, but it improved from my engineering degree to my MBA. Good students learn what they need to know and hopefully more. So what I know for sure is that starting out as an engineer, the better, faster, cheaper kind of mindset prepared me to find processes, tools, and techniques to save money in the supply chain and to help the companies that I work for and now my clients. So I'm here today to share a model that I've created using some of these tools and techniques. And hopefully some of you will help me continue on that learning journey as you give me some of your feedback and share your experiences as well. So we're going to cover a lot of information today, but I always want to connect with the audience and I want to make sure that we stay connected. And I have some prizes to give away at the end. So send me an email right now to get into the prize drawing, because I know your phones are right next to you. If you send an email to jane@purplelink.co, that's not .com, it's .co, and just put webinar in the subject line, then you'll be entered in the raffle. And if you're not quite ready to do that, that's okay. I'll give you another chance at the end before I actually make the drawing. So here's what we're going to talk about. I'm going to share some key elements or pillars of supplier management and discuss how those work within any and every level of an organization to build with the organizational maturity and the skills of that organization to find these dollars that are leaking through their supply chain, that everyone has this intuition that there's dollars to be found there, but they don't quite know how to find it. So we're going to go through all that material and then I'll give away the prizes. So I'm going to ask you a few questions, and if you'd like to share some of your insights and thoughts about this, I'm going to start talking about a term that I hear and I admittedly use all the time. These two terms maybe are thrown around offices all the time, multiple times a day, and those terms are value and value add. So I want you to tell me a little bit about how does your organization define value? So if you want to share, you can put in the chat. And if not, just think about for your own organization, how does your organization define value or value add? And then the second thing is, what's the biggest value add contribution from your department or function? So whatever department you're in the supply chain area, what do you think your biggest contribution is to the organization? And then what do your internal partners consider the biggest value add contribution from your department or function? Because one thing I've learned is we as humans tend to think very much self-centric about things. Not that we're self-centered, but we see things from our perspective and we kind of couch everything against that. But when you try to put yourself in your partners or your colleagues' shoes and say, how do you think they perceive me? Sometimes you get a little bit different insight, a little bit different perspective of that. And that's often helpful to say, am I really adding the contribution that I think? Is someone else seeing that? So that's an important area to do. So let's take that value a little bit. And I see in a chat, it can be a vague definition, and it is, and we'll talk about that. I also see a question to put my email in the chat, and maybe somebody can do that. It's jane@purplelink, all one word, .co. Thanks. So companies and employees seek products and services that add value to their products and services, the ones that they're producing and that they're selling to their customers. They're looking for things to enhance their brand. Within the company, many people intrinsically understand what value means, but they recognize things that add value to their organization. But people outside that circle or in a different company find that value can have a very different meaning. And if you change companies, you know that what works in one company doesn't necessarily work in another. So it's really important to consider what that value is. So I'm going to give you a couple ideas of value and value add. And thanks for those of you who are putting things in the chat. We get one comment that says it's recognized by the customer or the consumer as something that they're willing to pay for. And that's very much true. What has worth to them may add value to your company. But from a supply chain perspective, I'm going to share some things. And the first one is assurance of supply. as a supply chain organization, as supply chain professionals, one thing we add value with through the activities that we do on a day in, day out basis is make sure that there's assurance of supply. Our job is to get the right quantities at the right place, at the right time, in the right condition, all of those rights. So it's important that we continue to do that. That means quality, that means having some metrics, things around perfect orders, shortages, no limited obsolescence. All of that goes into that assurance of supply. But another thing that goes into that is being flexible. So being able to work with suppliers to get more or less of something than you originally thought you were going to need. And to make sure that you have that continuing availability of products and services and suppliers in the pool and in your network so that you can get done what your company needs to get done. The second thing I think is very important is contributing financially to the company. So you're probably here in part because you saw those dollars leaking through the supply chain. And we do that as part of supply chain professionals. We look for where can we find the dollars and how can we manage those dollars. Companies today spend as much as 70% of their direct dollars, direct material and labor dollars on material. So their direct costs are made up heavily of material today. So it's important that we understand that and we recognize that, and that we can help contribute to managing that and possibly reducing that cost. We also need to look at overhead costs, the costs that we contribute to the organization and the costs that are there that we want to try to get out of that cost model. We also need to be able to analyze this with our suppliers. We want to look at material dollars, labor dollars, percentages. We want to look at their overhead, and we want to be able to help them reduce their costs so that they can reduce the prices that we're paying for their goods. We also have to look at the cost of managing orders. We all have had suppliers that cost a lot of money for us to manage in terms of time and resources, poor quality, poor delivery, all of those things. So the managing orders is a cost that we want to be able to manage. And then we also are very much involved in the cash to cash flow through the company. Things like payment terms become very, very important, and how we work with our suppliers to get those payment terms to help our company out. The next area of value add is really in supplier management. And this comes when we have strategic sourcing exercises, when we're doing some concurrent engineering and maybe new product development, and working very closely with our partners and bringing the right suppliers in at the right time. It's also managing the contracts that get set up throughout the course, the product life cycle of the products that we're building, and then end of lifing those effectively, and then managing that performance from the time we select a supplier and onboard them through to the time that they complete their contracts with us and maybe move on to other customers, or we move on to other suppliers. And sometimes, hopefully a lot of times, those relationships are long and enduring and go through many years, sometimes decades, between customer and supplier. And then there's always the time factor. So we add value through managing things like cycle times, lead times, the time to convert a requisition to a purchase order, and then the time to get that purchase order after it's placed to make sure it gets in the door. So lead times, as we all know, have kind of gone crazy in the last year and a half due to the pandemic and other things. And so for us as supply chain professionals, trying to manage that, trying to at least stabilize those. I've worked with some clients who've seen lead times go all over the place. They increased immediately after the pandemic, then they decreased a little bit, and then now they're elongated even more. So to try to get some stability to that. And then understanding that cycle times are very important as well. And knowing how to reduce those is important for supply chain professionals, and how to ask those questions. And then strategy alignment. It's important that your organization as a supply chain is aligned with the greater organizational goals and strategies. But it's also important that you choose and select suppliers who are aligned with that. If we have different values, different goals, different perspectives on things across the supply chain, then our supply chain doesn't run as smoothly as it might. And that's what we're trying to do, is to get a smooth running supply chain where we have material, information, and dollars flowing through that supply chain in a nice, even flow. So it doesn't mean that we don't have a few ups and downs, but we are trying to avoid disruptions. So the strategy, whether our company is a low cost company, a high quality company, our service orientation may be a huge focus, whatever our company goals and strategies are, we want to make sure our supply chain departments are aligned with those and our suppliers are aligned with those. So this slide shows some examples of what constitutes values to companies. And as you can see, it builds from tactical activities on the bottom to very strategic initiatives that can provide a competitive advantage. So the value proposition is on the left and the supply chain role is on the right of this slide. So you can see things like deriving value from the spend is what the value proposition is. That's what the company wants. And that's our job as supply chain professionals is to harness the markets so we can get competitive advantages for our employer, our company. Reducing costs smack in the middle, that aligns a lot with supplier management. And that really requires some metrics, relationship management, risk management, knowing the market, knowing your suppliers, and all of those activities. So that's what we're trying to do, this is a journey, and this is not a win situation, but progress is a win. If we can we're not going to get to perfect, there are no perfect suppliers, but if we can continue to increase the value by adding in the suppliers that have the right capabilities, the right attitudes, the right strategies, processes, and tools that will help our company get to our goals, then that's what we're doing as good supply chain professionals. So in order to find these dripping dollars, we really have to start with the best opportunities. Sometimes that's the largest spend. Other times it's other types of opportunities. Many supply chain professionals and companies use spend analysis, and it makes sense. Use a Pareto approach, that 80-20 rule. Try to find out where you're spending the dollars, which suppliers are getting the most of your dollars. Because if you're only spending $10,000 with a supplier, even if you cut that in half, if your overall spend is $10 million, you're not moving a lot of needles there. So the Pareto approach is a great idea, and analyzing the spend is an important place to start. But I always say it's a good place to start, but please don't stop there. You really need to look at spend, but when we look at spend, I say this is a rear view mirror activity. When we look at the spend, we say, what did we spend the last 6 months? What did we spend the last 12 months? Companies don't often go back more than that, although with the pandemic, many companies have used 2019 as a baseline rather than 2020, since there were so many anomalies in that. So whatever you look at, if you're looking at spend, you're looking historically. What did I spend at that period of time with which suppliers? So again, great place to start. But one thing that companies can do, even if you only look at spend, is to say, not only what did I do the last X period of time, but what am I going to do in the future? Because many times suppliers are phasing in and out. If you have new projects that are starting, you might have suppliers that your spend with was pretty low because you were primarily buying prototypes and maybe some beta units and doing some proof of concept. Or maybe you even launched that product. So your new product launch may be in its early phases. So you haven't really spent a lot of money with that supplier over that last 6-month or 12-month period that you're looking at. But if that is coming up in sales, if that's ramping up, then you want to project and say, okay, we only spent this much money with that supplier in the last 6 months, but we know that we're ramping up. And by the time we get to the end of this year, we should be at this kind of a run rate, and we're going to be spending a lot more money with them. So project into the future. Conversely, you might have a supplier that has been on board for a long time, but that product is maybe getting replaced or upgraded. Maybe you've done some design changes to change the parts, to change the mix. Maybe you've designed parts out, and that supplier's spend may be dropping significantly from what it was the previous period of time. So if it is, you want to take that into account too. Look at the changes that you have planned. And also in this day and age with the pandemic issues, look at the finances and the financial stability of that supplier and say, are they able to take this much business going forward with us? Or is there a risk to that? So spend is a good place to start, but there's a lot of other things that you really want to consider, things that are critical to the business. So one place I start with is single and sole suppliers, where they may not have a lot of your money. They may not be one of the top few suppliers in spend, but if they're a sole source for you, if they're someone that you've actually qualified into your products and put there, especially if there's intellectual property involved, then that sole source can be a real big issue and a big opportunity as well. It can be a source of risk, but it can also be a place to look for dollars. And then if you have single sources where you've put all of your business with one supplier, you may have low switching costs and be able to find another one quickly. But if you have a single supplier that has any kind of volume of business, even if it's not a lot of dollars, if it's high volume, you want to make sure that you're prepared with that supplier to be able to backfill in case something happens. And talking about the intellectual property, it's really important to look at those suppliers that have your company's intellectual property. If you have patents and if you have drawings and confidential information, maybe not even full-on patents, but if you have confidential information, proprietary drawings and things, which suppliers have that? Those are critical to your business, and those are suppliers that you want to take a hard look at. Those should be in your tier 1 kind of suppliers. And if you're using your supplier's intellectual property, again, if you have that designed in and qualified into your programs, then that supplier is pretty important. It may be a standard motor that they make and they sell to lots of different customers, but if it's qualified into your product, then, and having something change about that or go wrong with that supplier, it means you're going to have to do requalifications, then that becomes a critical part to your supplier. That supplier becomes much more critical. So you want to elevate that and make sure that you include those. Risk, we're now looking for risk everywhere in supply base. Financial risk is a big deal, and it's good to check with suppliers regularly on their financial status, because companies that were pretty sound pre-pandemic, maybe not so much now, and vice versa, actually. Some suppliers that were a little bit financially wobbly prior to the pandemic, if they had the right kind of niche business, or if they acted on an opportunity, they may be much more financially sound than they were pre-pandemic. Then also look at performance of suppliers. Where was your last disruption from? Where was the last shoot kind of thing that you didn't expect to have happen? Look at those suppliers for that. If you have suppliers with risk, then it's important that you prioritize those in your segmentation process and look at them for opportunities to reduce cost. And that's total cost, not only the price that you pay, but it's the cost of managing those suppliers and going through those issues. And then finally, business fit is one of the areas that I think is really important to consider. If you have suppliers that maybe don't treat you like a very important customer, or you have what I used to call problem suppliers, the ones that are always having to have extra help for this, or needy suppliers, ones that should be more routine and aren't, then those are ones also that you can look at. And then if you have a big company and you're looking at very small companies, that business fit is important to look at. Can they really handle your kind of business capacity wise, capability wise? Can they handle your ups and downs? And conversely, if you're a smaller company and you're trying to do business with a bigger company, I always use Intel as an example. If you're trying to use Intel chips in your products and you're a small company, you probably don't have much leverage with them. So what is your best ability to collaborate with them, to cooperate with them, and have them cooperate and collaborate with you. It's important that you get that fit and that they're willing to work with you and respect you as the customer that you are. So at Purple Link, we look at improving the bottom line using a model that I've constructed to kind of pull all these things together. But that model is predicated on making sure that you've done this exercise and you've identified those suppliers with big opportunities. So assuming you have gone through this segmentation process, then let's take a look at the next piece. The first thing we're going to look at in this model that has 4 components is the performance. Supplier performance is very important. So when we talk about supplier performance, we usually think about cost and quality and delivery. Those are the 3 kind of standard metric areas that we look at in supply chain. But there's also a lot of other areas that you're looking for suppliers to perform. How responsive are they? How well do they answer your request for information? Or how quick are they to acknowledge your additional purchase orders? How willing and able are they to handle things like, can you increase that a little bit, decrease that a little bit, expedite that order, or maybe delay that order a little bit? How responsive are they to what your needs are? Again, I talked about business fit with the last one. Are these a good fit for your businesses? Do you have the same values and goals? And can you work together collaboratively? Looking at values, social responsibility is a big thing now for companies. It's also about the values of the company. So diversity, sustainability, and then things like compliance and all of that. So there's so many different areas that you want to look at in terms of social responsibility. What are the values of your company? And then what are your own personal values? And make sure that you and your company's values align. And then look at how your supply base fits into that. If you don't have alignment across all those areas, you're not going to have good fits and you're going to have problems down the line. So look at those and see how you can align that. Compliance is one of those headaches that every supply chain professional has dealt with. There are so many requirements on compliance these days. It just needs to be looked at very closely for whatever's looking at your, whatever your company is looking at. So whatever issues pertain to you, make sure you're aware of them, make sure your supplier's aware of them, and make sure that you're addressing those. Technology, we all know about technology breaches. We've talked about viruses for decades and hackers, but now we are dealing with things like ransomware and serious issues in some of those companies. Colonial Power is the one that comes to mind. It was in the April time, $4.4 million they had to pay to try to get their information back and get things out of ransom. The FBI has been able to track a lot of the money that they paid, because if you don't know, they had to pay in Bitcoin. That was the requirement. But they have been able to track that and recoup a lot of that, but they still can't find exactly who did this. So they're really digging into this. And then also we know that the geography of supply chains today are really getting a lot of scrutiny. Where are your suppliers? What is their opportunity? What kinds of things do they have so that they can really look at what's now, what's in the future. So many companies, larger companies, have supply locations in different parts of the world. So they may produce in China, but they also may produce in Europe, and some are now more and more in South America. So know the locations of your suppliers and your tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers, because that geography becomes more and more important as the geopolitical issues heat up and cool down and move around a little bit. The second quadrant then is going to be the relationships. And the relationships have to do with the length of time that you've done business. And this is an area where people get complacent. They think, oh, we've done business with that supplier for 30 years. We know those people, they know us. Everything's good. We work well together. But guess what? Things change. Suppliers get bought, suppliers get spun off, divisions get spun off, companies go out of business, companies decide to grow at exponential rates. So just because you've done business with them for a long time doesn't mean that your relationship won't change and that it's going to be sound in the future. I can give you an example of a company that did business with General Motors for about 40 years. Clark Cutler McDermott, I think was the name. And in about 2016, they had a bankruptcy and they surprised General Motors. General Motors was pretty much their only customer. They'd gotten rid of other customers over the years, been in business for over 40 years and done business with General Motors for that length of time. General Motors even picked them as Supplier of the Year, like 3 of the last 7 years that they did business together. And all of a sudden they were in bankruptcy, couldn't handle the business. General Motors had to go to court to get court orders to have them come back to work and actually do some work for a couple of weeks to get their work in process moving. And General Motors needed to get their tools out because it was a lot of their tooling. Big issue, could have been much worse, but it had some problems. And then again, today you look at automobile industries, look at the chips. You might have bought the chips from the same company for a long time, but that length of business is not the only thing that's going to sustain your relationship. To have good relationships, you need champions and sponsors within each organization. So the supplier needs a champion or a sponsor for you as a customer, and you as a customer need champions and sponsors for your suppliers to make sure that they're getting the attention that they need and you're working with them to the ultimate best way that you can. You need escalation paths, not just I know who my main contact is, but do I know who the quality people are? Do I know the design people? Do I know the managers and the manager's manager? Maybe even up to the executive in that organization. So I know who to call if I have a problem, because that executive engagement can really help. It doesn't mean that they have to talk on a weekly basis, but if they haven't met, if they don't know each other, if they don't recognize each other, then it can make solving problems a lot harder and take a lot longer time to do that. Neither of which are good things for either party involved when issues come up. It's important with these suppliers that relationships include business reviews and scorecards. So we talked about performance. You need to be measuring the performance. You need metrics. But you also need these business reviews where you share that feedback and make sure that it's a two-way feedback. Make sure that you're listening as well as communicating your company's position about that relationship and about the performance and the business overall. You need some shared goals. If you're not working toward the same direction, it's going to become apparent pretty quickly and your relationship is going to erode. Supplier relationships help things like concurrent engineering. They help a ton when you're trying to do new product developments. They can reduce your time. They can make sure that you get better, more robust designs in there and you're ready to hit the ground at the time that you want to go to production, that you don't have to do a lot of handing over, moving from one silo to another, and a lot of learning curve kind of coming up. You've got products that are ready to go. That requires some transparency, and that transparency usually includes sharing of information about cost. So cost models, which are very important. And in the gap of cost models, because I know so many people tell me my suppliers won't share anything. And I say, well, what have you asked for? Well, we asked for their cost model. Okay, what did you ask for? Did you ask for all of the cost? Did you ask for the percentage of direct labor to direct material? Did you ask for the percentage of overhead? Or are you quibbling about the fact that you think they're making too much profit? So what are you really trying to understand? And I always say, ask for the drivers. Ask for what's driving your indirect cost or what's driving your direct cost. Is it the material or is it the labor? If it's the labor, is there something they can do? And if it's material, sometimes that's the easiest thing to solve because collaboratively, you might be able to get a better pricing on material. Many times I've seen suppliers go to their customer and say, look, they're charging me this for aluminum, or they're charging me this for whatever this chemical is or something. But the customer may have other sources of those particular products or other suppliers that have access to that, or other relationships that can be leveraged to get those prices down. And if you can reduce the cost of the direct material and the direct labor is often enabled by removing the hours. So maybe there's extra quality checks in there, or maybe there's extra time for doing some things that are not as value add, and you can help them by reviewing their processes, sharing your processes, benchmarking, helping them understand what best in class is, or maybe even helping them buy a new piece of equipment, which will do some automation or semi-automate a particular thing that takes a lot of time. If your company has to make an investment in that, it may be well worth that to try to get that price, that recurring price down over time. So look for the drivers. If you can't get any other information, at least get that. And when they understand what you're doing with that information and how you're addressing it and how you're trying to work together, then that transparency gets better and better, and they share more information, and you might ultimately get the cost models that you're looking for. But at least you can get close. It's not about how much money are you making on this. It's way more than that. Then another area is risk. As I said, we live in risky times. We just do. And traditionally, supplier risks were around things like, how much capacity do you have? Which kinds of capabilities do you have? How can you do this? And then now it's been in the financial strength, which is still a big issue for that. It's also, though, business continuity. Companies have looked for a while at business continuity, my business continuity. But if you're not looking at your key suppliers' business continuity plans and what they're actually doing with that, then there's a risk there. So you should know what your suppliers are doing. Your supplier should know what's going to happen if your business has a problem. I live in Southern California and we have earthquakes here. So if we have earthquakes, we want to tell our suppliers if we have an issue, and we've had fires lately too. So if we have issues, this is our business continuity plan. This is who's going to get hold of you. This is who's going to tell you what's going on. This is how we're going to work that. You need to do that with your suppliers, and you need your suppliers to do that with you. If your supplier is in an area of hurricanes and they happen to have a flood or a problem from that hurricane, who's going to tell you, and how quickly are you going to get notified of what's going on? You need to know your contact point and how that's going to work. And companies need to do these business continuity plans more routinely than they're doing. And that also includes things like succession planning. I worked with a lot of small businesses throughout my career, and I've worked with a lot of what we call mom and pop shops, where there's one main person that is the pillar of that company, and the owner, the manager, the general manager. But what happens if he or she decides that they are tired of the business? What happens if they get ill? What happens if they get COVID and they can't work for a few weeks or a few months? What happens if they decide, hey, no, it's time to retire. I don't need to deal with this anymore. What happens to that business? You should ask those questions. I know a lot of times I've had people on my staff and my clients say, well, we don't really want to ask about that. It's their business and it's a good business. And we just expect them to tell us if they're going to make any changes. Don't do that. Don't assume, ask. They will tell you what their plans are. And if they don't want to tell you their plans, then that's at least a yellow flag that says, why aren't you talking about this? You should be telling us what your plans are if. They don't have to have solid plans all drawn out, but if they're not thinking about it, or they're unwilling to discuss that with you, that may mean that there's either no plan, or that they're doing some things that they think that you might not be happy with, like selling their business or shutting their business down, or. So look at those things in the terms of risk. And when we talk about risk, we need to talk about it in terms of impacts and probabilities. So what is the probability that will happen, and what is the impact if it does? If you're not looking at both of those, then you're not doing a real risk-based analysis of things. And then finally, you need the skills on your team that understand these other three quadrants and can work these things. So you need to have some supply chain skills like understanding forecasting, demand management, MRPs, ERPs, total cost of ownership. But you also need some people who have the ability to think about strategies. And strategies aren't scary. They're just plans that tell us how we're going to do something. How are we going to maintain the performance that we have? How are we going to improve the performance? How are we going to get them to do something that they're not doing? Or how are we going to get them to stop doing something that is not beneficial to us, like charging us for every split order that we have to have? So how can we do those things? And then looking at that from that risk-based perspective also really helps your business school skills. So you need to have, and we'll talk about some skills in just a second. So that's the 4 quadrants of supplier management. Then you need to look at how mature is my organization. So organizational maturity is a spectrum. It runs from very immature organizations to very sophisticated organizations that have maybe Oracle, SAP, they have ERP systems, they have a hierarchy of people, they might have CPOs in this organization where they have a lot of emphasis on that, and they have managers in different organizations. Or it may be where your supply chain team is a couple of people that work, one works in the warehouse, inventory management, another one a buyer or two, and that's kind of all, and you report to the production supervisor or. So anywhere in there is fine, but think about where you are, be honest about where you are, and then think about where you would like to be, because there are ways that you can move along that and get more mature without going out and buying a whole SAP system. So metrics are one. What kind of metrics do you have in place for your own organization and for your suppliers? If you don't have any, go put a few in place. Start with 1 or 2. You don't have to start with 12. That's too many. But if you're not doing that, how can you do that? And what's going to be meaningful about that to your organization? Then think about this reactive to proactive spectrum. Is your organization really a reactive organization where you get requisitions from wherever, and your main job is to convert those requisitions to purchase orders and then make sure the parts get in? Maybe you can get more involved in the inventory management. Maybe you can get more involved in the product development. Maybe you can get new suppliers on board sooner when you know what's going on with adding new products or adding new customers or things. So where are you on that reactive to proactive? On the very proactive side, you've got people assigned to new product development. You're actually chairing organizations. You've got business cards and business reviews and ownership of those suppliers that are driving those initiatives. What's your structure? How many processes? If you don't have processes, you need some basic processes. Not 15 pages of paper, but what are your processes? So how are you going to do things repetitively? How do you bring a new person on board? How do you teach them what is there? You can't add another person if you don't have processes to make sure that you can replicate things and grow and scale that way. So what is your structure? And do you need more people or do you need more resources that you can tap into in the organization? You might not be very strong in financial analysis. So your structure doesn't include that, but do you have somebody in the company, in the finance or accounting department that can help you and assist you with that? Find those areas and that will increase your maturity. Financial perspective, what does supply chain do? Are they managing the dollars or is somebody else managing the dollars and they're just being told what to do, how to place those orders, how much to do? Talent management, again, what kinds of skills do you have? What kinds of skills do you need? Who is defining the talent that you need and want and helping you bring that into the organization? And again, sometimes it's borrowing and using other resources in the company, maybe through a matrix type of hierarchy rather than actually hiring that talent into your organization. Relationships we've talked about, but again, what are your relationships not only with your suppliers, but with your internal stakeholders and the champions and the sponsors or the potential champions and sponsors of your suppliers? Appetite for risk. We all have an appetite for risk. Companies have an appetite for risk. Tech companies tend to have a higher appetite and risk tolerance level. Defense contractors tend to have less appetite for risk and they have much more that are less risk tolerant than other organizations. There's, again, not good or bad, but where are you and where do you want to be and where do you think you can be? And then finally, looking at your organization of supply chain within the company. Is this an organization that's seen as value add? Is this just one more necessary piece that we have to have? And they're structured under this organization, and they highly tactical? Or is this a CPO organization where supply chain is seen as a very important piece of the company and the general strategies that we're doing? So I've constructed this model with 4 levels of org maturity. The lowest being assurance of supply, which is conventional procurement, highly transactional. Then into procurement, which has a little bit more strategic sourcing, maybe a little bit of category or commodity management. Next, integrated supply management. Integrated supply chain, meaning you've got some managing of the performance of suppliers. You're actively looking at the relationships, maybe starting to look at the risk within your supply base. Finally, value management, where supply chain is really considered a competitive advantage. This is something, as my friend used to say, this is where you're cooking with gas, where you really are seen as an integral part of the C-suite, and your suppliers see you as valued customers, and you're really working across those lines and making great results for your organization in reducing cost and risk. I tout this horn of communication and cooperation and collaboration. I'm a big believer in collaboration, which is a win-win mentality. If you lose, then life looks differently. And when suppliers lose and they come back to renegotiate, they're not happy, and it's not good for you or for the supplier. And if you feel like you lost, then again, going back to that supplier is not good, and it's not usually as results oriented as it might be. So it requires communication. Communication is in person, phone calls, emails, but it also is following up and following through. That's very important. Knowing escalation paths and having all of those stakeholders identified is a very important part of the communication. You need trust. Trust is something that usually gets built over time. In the era of the pandemic, many companies did not have time to build trust with people because they were just looking for some supplier that would give them parts. And the trust could be built very quickly. So I've seen trust built very quickly, almost like, you got it, I need it, let's work on this and figure this out. And then I've seen trust that was built up over maybe a decade or more just dissolve because of one party or the other not fulfilling what they needed, letting the other one down, not communicating, not being honest. And that's a sad thing to see, because trust can be gone very quickly. So trust requires feedback, some transparency. You need both parties committed to the relationship. And if you can do this, then you want to look at partnering with these suppliers. Again, these top tier suppliers that have the most opportunity to help you find those dollars that are leaking through your supply chain and put them back on your bottom line. Think not only getting through the pandemic, because we're still in the middle of the pandemic, but beyond the pandemic, and making this a good situation for everyone. So clear expectations are required. Metrics. I'm an engineer by trade, industrial engineer. I always emphasize you have to measure it. If you're not measuring it, you don't know if you're getting better or worse. You don't have any solid data to follow on to say this is working or not working. And you're not able to replicate or duplicate things that are working well. Valued, trusted suppliers, that takes both parties, the supplier and the customer, working on that. Collaboration, I've said many times today, open and frequent communication, and then these basic skill sets. So you need the skills, and it's not surprising to anyone, I don't think, that there are certain skills which are needed to identify the potential savings that you have, which is the first step. But skills are used by each company a little differently. Like, for instance, I have a pretty broad set of skills, but each of my clients is different and specific and unique challenges. So a solution in one company may not be a solution for another company. For example, one of my clients is in defense and aerospace, and they have to follow FAA regulations. I have another client that's in the cosmetic business, and they're following FDA regulations. Pretty regulated industries, both of them, and they both have inventory challenges. So looking at their inventory challenges, they also have obsolescence challenges. So I look at one with the FDA and say, okay, your issues are shelf life and making sure that you have the inventory turns that you need and you're moving that inventory through. When I look at the FAA, the one that's the aerospace, their issues are building up too much inventory and keeping inventory for too long past its useful life. And how long do we keep it? Because we service these planes that are still in work, and we're going to have to do repairs and whatever for the next 20 years. So very, very highly regulated FDA, FAA, but very different solutions for both of those. So we're looking at the context, and then we're looking at the processes. So we talked about a process to segmenting suppliers. So you also need a process to identify and prioritize your savings opportunities. If you leave it to chance, you'll win a few, lose a few, and probably be frustrated with your overall results. So you need to develop some standard approaches and processes to identifying and going after those dollars. That's probably going to include some metrics along with your measurement techniques, looking at the relationships like escalation paths, scorecards, and different aspects of that to try to find what you need. And it's also going to require some tools. And tools often look like skills. So I can do whole webinars on building skills and training people within an organization, but we're going to look at these pretty broadly. So these are 5 types of skills and families of skills that I find transcend most industries, companies, and countries. Each of these has both hard and soft skills. And real quickly, I'll go through these, starting with the operations and supply chain. If you look at operations and supply chain, hard skills in there, capacity planning, forecasting, sourcing, a lot of those things. But there's a lot of soft skills in there too, like relationship building and influence. Negotiation is often a soft skill. There's some hard aspects of that. And then business acumen, being able to calculate ROIs and payback periods, being able to do some analysis. And then some soft skills of being able to influence that and understanding what questions to ask to get the data to tell you some information. Teamwork, another one, being able to work with people is a very valuable skill. Strategic decision-making, very hard to describe, very hard to teach, very hard to learn. But over and over, I see study after study that says our organization lacks strategic decision-making. Okay, so what does that mean for your organization? You need to understand that, put that in the context of what that looks like. And then relationship building and influence. This is not only with suppliers to customers and customers to suppliers, but with stakeholders, internal stakeholders, department to department, function to function. All of this is very important. And all of this will help you work together to find those dollars that are leaking through your supply chain. So what I know for sure is there is a better way to find those dollars and put them back to your bottom line. Each company has challenges, but challenges do bring with them opportunities. You need some metrics, you need some clear expectations and clear goals. Remember that suppliers are an extension of operations, and so they are part of your organization trying to help you achieve your goals. And then try to be as flexible with agility to support the success of your organization. Flexibility is key. If you think, oh, I have a process down and this is it, and we're never using anything else, then that is probably not going to work. Each case can be situational. When I teach my students, I tell them my favorite answer is it depends. There's a lot of things that can happen, and we all need to be flexible and be able to morph to those different situations. So this time of year, a lot of companies are wrapping up their year. They're looking to see, how did we do in 2021? Did we get the results we wanted? So if they did, that's great. Then they say, okay, now we got to get ready for 2022. How are we going to repeat that? Or if they look around and they say, we didn't do so great in 2021, but 2022 is coming and we're going to do better. Okay. How are you going to do better? That's the question. If you try to do the same things, you're probably going to get the same results. So it's hard to sustain momentum, and these results and the requirements of us to our companies are just getting higher year over year. So I've just shared some basic things with you, and I realize that these are not easy concepts to implement, and that I threw a lot of things at you that you can't really do at once. So I want you to think about your company, your own support system. Who do you have in your corner to help you implement some or all of these techniques and put processes into your workplace to help you find those dollars? If you could use some outside support, I invite you to consider working with me. If you're impatient to get started, let's talk. You can schedule a call with me at callwithjane.com, and we can talk about working together in the future. If you're like me, you attend these talks and you say, oh, this is great, let's do this. I know I can do these two things. But as soon as we turn this Zoom call off, you're going to get back to your office or back to your desk in the real world. You get distracted by the latest disruption, or you try to implement something and people look at you like, what are you talking about? Because they weren't in the seminar with you. So if all of that can be really frustrating. So if you want to talk about that, you know how to reach me. And if you schedule a call by the end of the day, you're going to get the slides from this presentation, and you'll get signed up for my webinars. Right now, I'm doing not weekly, but every 2 weeks, and we're looking at what we're going to do into 2022, but we're going to continue those. So you can book that today, get that on the calendar, and then you don't have to worry about it. We can talk and see about next steps. So now it's time for the prizes. I have three things to give away. I'm going to give the slides. So if you send me the email at jane@purplelink.co, you're going to get the slides. That's a given. And then if you do that, you'll also get a subscription to me today. And then if you are the winner today, you are going to get this great book. So this book is called Measure What Matters. I told you I'm big on metrics. This gentleman has worked, the author, John Doerr, has worked with Google, worked as a VC. It's a book that's recommended by Bill Gates, and he talks about OKRs. So instead of just metrics or KPIs, the key performance indicators, he talks about OKRs, objectives and key results. And a lot of companies have found this very valuable. So it gives you a different way to look at that. So here's what you're going to get. I'm going to give you about 30 more seconds because we're running out of time here. And then I'm going to pick a winner. Let's see. My random number generator is going to be Brian Kelly. So Brian, you need to send me, are you still here for one thing? And then you need to send me another email with an address where I can send your book. So we're a little bit long on time. We've got about another minute or two. I'll take any questions, but I want to leave you with this one thought, that what you do today can improve all your tomorrows. So if you want some different types of results, take action today and reach out.
Thank you, Jane. This was a great presentation, very informative, a lot of information in here. We are out of time, unfortunately, but if anybody does have a question, they can always email us at ismnewjersey@gmail.com, and we will forward the question over to Jane. At this time, I would like to let everybody know that we have been recording this program, and we will be sending out the recording link also with your continuing education hour for joining us today. Be sure to tune in next week, October 20th, as Kelly Varner she's the Managing Director for Buyers Meeting Point. She will be our featured guest on our Voice of Supply Chain program. At this point, I'd like to say thank you for joining us, and we'll see you at our next program. And thanks again, Jane, and thanks to all of our attendees.
Yes, thank you all, and thank you, Kathy. Have a great week.